Today's marijuana is definitely not that of the 60s and 70s. It's far more potent, and research is increasingly linking heavy use to serious mental health issues, including psychosis and schizophrenia. Today's guest on Grieving Out Loud, Kristen Gilliland, knows the danger all too well.
He started hearing voices. He, thought that people were following him. He felt like sometimes it may have been, one of us, his dad or his mom, were against him, or we had someone, ask someone to follow him.
It's a struggle Kristen never imagined would touch her own family, especially given her background. She holds a Ph.D. in organic chemistry and was a professor of organic chemistry, neurochemistry, and the chemistry of drugs and poisons.
The one thing I did not know, and these are all the things I look back of, shoulda, coulda, woulda, looking back, I didn't understand the difference in potency. I didn't realize how the potency, the percent THC, that psychoactive component in the marijuana had changed.
In this episode of Grieving Out Loud, Kristen opens up about what she wishes she had known sooner, what parents need to know as marijuana becomes more accessible, and how she used her scientific background to chart a new path after losing her son.
Every day you open your eyes, it's a gift. And I think that losing Anders was the one thing that it put my whole life in perspective.
Today on Grieving Out Loud, I'm joined by Kristen Gilliland, a scientist, educator, and grieving mother who has turned unimaginable loss into a mission to help others. She earned her Ph.D. in organic chemistry, taught chemistry and neurochemistry as a professor, and even worked on new treatments for schizophrenia at Vanderbilt University. Kristen's path shifted when her teenage son was diagnosed with drug-induced schizophrenia and then tragically later died of an accidental overdose. Since then, she's devoted her skills and passion to educating young people and parents about the adolescent brain, mental health, and the dangers of today's drug supply. Through her role at the Warren Center for Neuroscience Drug Discovery, Kristen presents in schools and communities across Tennessee and created the documentary Speaking Through Me to spark vital conversations about prevention, resilience, and self-care. She is here to share her family's story, her science, and her heart. Kristen, welcome to Grieving Out Loud.
Thank you, Angela. I'm very honored to be here.
Well, it is so great to be able to talk to you. One of our employees at Emily's Hope met you at a conference where you were speaking and was just blown away by everything that you had to say and your experiences. And I'm so anxious to share all that with our listeners.
Wonderful. Yeah.
You started in neuroscience and brain science as your career, probably never thinking it was really going to, come to hit home in your family's personal story.
No, I was always fascinated by neuroscience, by the brain, by the way drugs, even, the pharmaceutical drugs impact the brain. And, there's a part of me that thinks that I had this purpose, and not that I would give anything to, as I lost my son, I would give anything to have him back. But it's just crazy to me how everything has unfolded. Everything I've done in my life has led me to what I'm doing now. And, but like I said, I would do anything to have him back.
Kristen, I say the exact same thing. I feel like everything I did in my life was like preparation or training me for what I'm doing now. Now, I would just as soon not do any of it to have my daughter back, but my training in journalism, talking with grieving families, I was working on the stories on the opioid crisis on the day my daughter died, so I just think like, what was all that for? And here I am, doing this work now. Here you are doing this work now with a different perspective than me, but just as both just really valuable perspectives. But it's ironic, isn't it?
Yeah. I would have never, ever imagined where I'd be right now. and and I'm so sorry for your loss of Emily, because it's just that day, my life changed. That day, it was like I had two chapters, completely different chapters in my life. The previous chapter was really trying to help my son. It was, obviously everything I did to teaching and all of that, but really when my son, became addicted to substances and all of that and developed schizophrenia, it was like my whole life was different then. But then after we lost him, then it was just, what can I do? What can I do? I mean, after it took a few years for me, obviously, to gather myself together and figure out what I was going to do. And I would ask him, like, what can I do? Just show me what you want me to do to try and help, because I know I have to help I have to do this. So
I think also what it should tell other people that if a journalist who knows how to research and is doing reporting on the opioid crisis, if a brain scientist is doing the work and yet and I've talked to, of course, judges and doctors and so many other people who've had children with similar struggles and ended up losing their kids either because of mental health or substance use disorder, to overdose or fentanyl poisoning. If we can't stop it from happening, given all the knowledge, then how is anybody else supposed to stop it from happening to their
I,
children?
that's right. There's so many times that I go into places, into schools, and there are parents that I hear from some of the counselors here that, "Oh, we don't want anybody to tell them the name of a drug." We don't want them to hear, like, the kids, like, we don't want her
Yeah.
to say marijuana, or we don't, and I think, "Oh," it's just that mentality of, "Oh, it's not gonna happen to my kid." And
R Right,
yeah,
and it can happen to anyone.
yes, and we need to reduce that stigma, that shame, and those people who are suffering in addiction, to know that it is a disease of the brain and that we need to be there for them and to help them. And it is almost impossible, I mean, they're my heroes. People who are in recovery, they're my heroes, and what they've been through and how they've been able to change, through neuroplasticity to change their reward system, their brain, everything is phenomenal.
Well, nobody understands that better than you, that this is not a moral failing or a character flaw, that it is truly something going on within the brain. The brain is forever changed. I call it like we understand diseases of the body, right? But we want to deny diseases of the brain, of the mind, right? We want to say, oh, well, that should just be, you should have more willpower. You should, just do better. Just say no, all of those things that we know don't work.
Right, right, and if you really look at within just even some of the, MRI scans and things like that of brains of people who are in active addiction versus, a healthy brain, it's right there, you can see. It's like their brain has changed, and if we were to look at someone who has, Alzheimer's disease, their brain has changed, and
Right.
it is a disease, and we need to treat it as a disease, and these people, to let other people who have that, that feeling like it is a moral failing, it's like these people, even if they wanted to stop, they can't. They can't stop, and so it is not a choice, it's not willpower, it's not all of that, it is a disease, and just like any other disease, we have to treat it, and treat these people with dignity and respect.
Are you ready to protect the next generation from the dangers of substance use? Emily's Hope has created a comprehensive K through 12 substance use prevention curriculum designed to educate, empower, and equip students with the tools they need to make healthy choices. Our age-appropriate lessons start in kindergarten and build through high school, using science, real stories, and interactive learning to help kids understand their bodies, brains, and risk of drug use. We're already reaching thousands of students across multiple states, and we're just getting started. Visit emilyshopeedu.org to learn more and share our curriculum with your school administrators and counselors. At Emily's Hope, we believe prevention begins with education. Let's work together to keep our kids safe. Kristen had twin sons, Anders and Jonas. From an early age, she noticed their fraternal twins had very different personalities. Jonas was outgoing, while Anders struggled with social anxiety.
When they got into middle school, Jonas was going off and making all these friends, and Anders was, having trouble. He would want to stay in his room. He was very musical, very creative. He would draw, amazing artist, and he was looking for people that were kind of, would accept him for who he was. Because even his teachers used to say, "Oh, he's in Anders land," because he was just kind of out, like just in his own world, and he would draw and do these things, and so he found some people who, accepted him for just who he was, and unfortunately, they were started using, marijuana, and we lived in California where it was legal
For adults. For adults.
for adults. That's exactly
Right.
right. But legal, medically, so not recreationally yet, but as kids go, where there's a will, there's a way. So he started using that, and of course, against his parents, we were very, adamant about, "No, we don't want you smoking marijuana," all this stuff.
A
Well,
lot of parents, Kristen, a lot of parents think that's just a rite of passage, but you knew better because of your training, right?
I did know that, but the one thing I did not know, and these are all the things I look back of, shoulda, coulda, woulda, looking back, I didn't understand the difference in potency. I didn't realize how the potency, the percent THC, that psychoactive component in the marijuana had changed, not realizing how that was going to impact the developing brain. And honestly, the whole system where THC interacts in the brain has really just started to be understood in the 1960s on. So it's relatively new, and we're finding out more and more. But he had started to use and showing symptoms of psychosis.
When you say symptoms of psychosis, explain to people what happened.
Yes. He started hearing voices. He, thought that people were following him. He felt like sometimes it may have been, one of us, his dad or his mom, were against him, or we had someone, ask someone to follow him. And, and psychosis, when it presents itself, can be even as simple as, the way cars are parked in a lot, like the way how all the cars are lined up. That means that there's something in the universe, or there's something in the government. They have everybody parking their cars this way because this is going to happen. So we took him to a psychiatrist, and they, at the time, had diagnosed him with schizophrenia. But he did ask, the psychiatrist asked by chance, "Have you been smoking marijuana?" He was 17 at this time. Said, "Have you been smoking marijuana?" And he said yes. And the psychiatrist had mentioned that we have seen now where there is, and I don't want to say it causes it, but there's an association between marijuana use and psychosis, or, you know, potentially schizophrenia. And so they put him on antipsychotics, and he didn't like the way they made him feel. And that's when he started going into other substances, because he didn't feel creative anymore. He didn't like to draw or make music. And so he started using other substances and moved from Xanax to cocaine to heroin. And that's how he died.
Yeah, and so that's, similar to Emily, started using marijuana at a very young age along with Xanax, and eventually moved on to heroin, and it was heroin laced with fentanyl,
Mm.
that caused her death at 21. Emily, at one point, was diagnosed with ADD. I never really thought she had that because, when she was little, I could sit down and she could read, I could read like 10, 15 books to her in one setting. She never seemed, I thought her attention was okay. But when we were searching for answers as to what was going on with her, she was prescribed an ADD medication and didn't like it because it said it slowed everything down and made it boring. She's very artistic, very creative, very dramatic person. But some of these things as a parent, when you're navigating these, even when you're a scientist, right? It's just like, okay, you are looking for answers, but there's no pat, easy answer for your kid. And the other thing I will say before we talk about that is that now I have heard of thousands of stories of adolescents experiencing psychosis because of
Yes.
early marijuana use.
Yes. And that is, it's definitely the numbers of psychosis. I would say people coming into emergency departments or young kids coming into emergency departments with psychosis, and the percent of those kids who have cannabis on board, that has increased drastically.
For parents in that situation, knowing what to do can certainly be difficult. Kristen said she and Anders' father had different ideas, and one of her main recommendations to parents now is that both of them have to be on the same page.
It was so difficult, and it's one of the things I talk to when I speak to parents. It's like, this is your child's life, and you, no matter what it is, you guys have to get on the same page here, and obviously a page where you're going to help your child, and you're going to try and not let them do
Right.
use substance.
Kristen, I had the same issue with Emily's dad. We were
Mhm.
not on the same page until it really was too late, until the very end,
Mm.
when finally he said, "Yes, there's a problem here," and went with us when we were meeting with the interventionist 3 days after she died. Our intervention was supposed to be held. And finally, I had gotten him on board, but up to that point, no. I mean, it was so I think you're right. It's like you're battling this other person who sees things differently than you, who's not willing to do the same, not seeing it as a problem, not thinking you need to take some maybe drastic steps until it's too late.
Right, and I had at that time, like, the CVS pharmacist, which, they're not supposed to do, but calling me and saying, "Your son is buying needles," your son,
Hi.
and so having those conversations with my son, but at this time, we had separated because we were just on such different pages there, and, yeah, he had lived with his father during this time, and it was impossible to try and get him to.
Right.
When you have 2 parents that are telling you completely different things, and yeah, I will say I was so passionate, let's put it that way, passionate with just trying to get him to stop doing anything. I will do anything, um,
Me too.
but then I was told, by his father that he doesn't, if you tell him he's an addict, he's gonna be an addict, and he doesn't have a problem and all of this, and I said, "I'm not telling him he's an addict, I'm telling him that I'm here and I want to help him, and I would just want you to be on this page with me so that we can go and get him help together, because he will do that," but it was too late. It was too late.
Yes. It isn't impossible, and Emily also lived with her dad during this time and when she died, and so it's just an impossible situation,
Right.
because you're not just dealing with the person who is suffering from the addiction, you're dealing with a force working against you, trying to what you think is the right thing, right? To get them help, to do whatever it takes to keep them alive. And in our case, finally, when I think he finally was like, "Yes, this is really bad," and agreed to go, and we worked on the intervention. It was too late. It was too late. At 22 years old, Anders died from a drug overdose. The loss, along with Anders' battle with substance use disorder, was extremely difficult for the entire family, including his twin brother.
He had a very difficult time, and he, was very angry, very, very angry, and it took him about 4 or 5 years before he kind of, I think is just now starting to heal, and we can actually talk about Anders. That's what's hard is, it was before I couldn't even bring up his name, and he didn't wanna hear anything about him. And, one of the most difficult things about that too is, like, they share the same birthday, and my
Mm.
heart hurts for him because how, it's, like, so bittersweet for him. It's like, "Oh, okay, here's my birthday, but I don't have my twin brother here with me to celebrate."
Right.
And yeah, my heart hurts for him because I can't imagine how difficult that is because there is, from the get-go, I always said, they were womb mates. They
Yeah.
sh they would kick their I could see them, like, even in the ultrasound, I could see their little legs, and they would be almost, like, going back and forth, kicking each other, so, they were inseparable even though they were very different, but
Yeah, you mentioned how different Jonas's personality was than
right.
Anders. Was Jonas able to stay away from substances, or maybe they didn't ever have a hold on him the way they did
No,
with
he
the
he had his own demons too, and but he's doing much better now, but again, it was a very similar deal, and after, we lost Anders, it was again, which was shocking to me that it would be at the same, like, where someone who had gone through that already and seen his son die not realize that, okay, we might wanna now do some prevention.
So, Jonas is doing okay today, but had a similar battle with him, and that is scary to me because I have talked to parents who've lost more than one child,
Yeah.
in this epidemic, and I bet you really worried about losing your other son.
Oh my gosh. It was definitely something that there were times, and just every time I would call him and he wouldn't answer the phone or text, it was those constant things of just checking, and he's like, "Mom, oh my gosh, I'm fine. I'm fine. Leave me alone." It's like I apologize, but I just can't, I've got to know that you're
Right,
okay. And
right.
yeah, but he's doing now.
I stalk my other children. When I say stalk, their location, and I always tell them, like, "This is just for my own anxiety." Like, they're adults, I'm never gonna, like, say, "What are you doing?" or something. I just wanna see, like, before I go to bed, "Oh, you made it home okay," or whatever, because you do have so much anxiety. When you lose a child, you realize it can happen,
Right.
and, you don't wanna live your life in fear, and you don't wanna limit what your other kids do, but it's a reality.
And the one thing that's been very interesting about, like I just lost my father this year, and it was so different. And I maybe you've experienced this in some capacity where that was it's like almost a comfort that he's going to be with my son now, my dad. It was like this feeling of, but also it was in order of the way it should be in life.
As the director of outreach and advocacy programs for the Warren Center, Kristen now speaks at schools, community centers, and recovery programs about the developing teenage brain, how stress, anxiety, and substance use affects it, and the dangers of high potency cannabis, fentanyl, and other drugs.
I teach kids about the impact of stress and substance use, social media on the developing brain, the impact of just also their self narrative, what they're speaking to the how do they talk to themselves? We speak to ourselves more than we talk to anyone, and is it positive or is it negative? And teaching them about neuroplasticity and how they have this huge gift during adolescence. Neuroplasticity is uh, you have a lot more during adolescence than you do as an adult. You still have it as an adult, but it's much easier to use. And so just trying to teach them how to make healthy connections. And I definitely talk to them about the impact of cannabis on the developing brain and how THC, a lot of people think, okay, well, cannabis, or marijuana, it grows from the ground and, all of this.
It's natural, it's great, it's wonderful. I've heard all those things. Yes.
Exactly. And so I don't go in, my whole message is really trying to come from a compassionate side and an educational side, not the DARE program. It's trying to empower kids with knowledge about their developing brain and how beautiful their brain is and how vulnerable it is, but how they can literally become who and how they want to be as an adult. If they learn these tools, I give them a set of tools, well-being tools, and how to practice that through neuroplasticity and just trying to help them to build a healthy brain into adulthood. Uh, because, with these are things that I wish I would have done with my kids when I was younger. Do you know what I mean? I, I knew about them, but after I lost honors, I really learned about them
Oh,
and just thought, oh, that's where I said, like, what can I do, Anders? What can I do to help other kids? And so it's kind of what fell in my lap. And I'd been doing it all along, but not, not as focused, with my full attention being on it.
Right. I get it 100% because I felt the same way. And I always said that the Emily's Hope substance use prevention curriculum came about because when Emily was in 3rd grade, I did a special for television on methamphetamine, and we showed the before and after of people who had used meth. We talked to people who had died, families who loved ones had died from meth use, and people whose lives were ruined. And I had her watch that in 3rd grade. It wasn't a special for television; it was pretty adult, and she was always anti-meth. And I thought, well, she didn't get the whole message about all these substances and what they do to the brain. So the brain is the star of our curriculum. It really is. Starting in we start in kindergarten, trying to teach kids how to protect their brains and their bodies and what substances do to the brain because I don't think we're doing enough of that
No.
at a young enough age. And so we do that in her honor. It is really something that I think is so important. What you're doing and our high school lessons now have so many lessons, so many things about cannabis, but I think parents often think it's just a rite of passage, like, everybody smokes weed, you go to college campuses, there's so much weed around, but, we need to start taking that seriously, the high levels of THC and what it can do to the developing brain.
Well, and what people don't understand is, the majority of people, is that the levels of THC that are in there, they pretty much carpet bomb the brain. And so the place where THC interacts in the brain is, it's like a catcher's mitt or a parking spot where THC goes into, and that parking spot is one of the most abundant parking spots in the brain. Really, and so when THC comes in, especially at these high levels, it literally kind of, carpet bombs the brain, and what it does is it changes the way neurons talk to each other, so neurons being the cells that actually communicate with one another, kind of like a game of, of telephone where it tells something, and the way neurons talk, they either like, "Let's dial up that activity," or, "Let's dial it down." And what THC does is it changes that communication wherever that parking spot is when it enters the brain. And so when it fills the brain, what it does is literally all of the communication in the brain kind of goes haywire. And it causes, that's what gives the high feeling, because what this system where THC interacts, its whole purpose is to keep the brain in what we call homeostasis or imbalance. It's meant to keep all the activity in the brain in balance. And it does it. It's a beautiful, beautiful system, but it's always working on demand. Like, oh, there's a little too much gas over here in the brain, so let's put a little brake on or let off the gas a little bit. Oh, there's too much brake over here. Let's, let the brake off and put a little gas in. So it does it perfectly. And if there's too much gas in one region of the brain, that might look like a seizure. If there's not enough, it might look like someone being unconscious. But when THC enters, it takes over all of that. So no longer, you don't have this beautiful system operating to keep everything in check. It's like there was a scientist, Matthew Hill, and I love because he said it's like a thermostat. And that's exactly what it is like in the brain. If it's too cold, the heater turns on. If it's too hot, the AC turns on. And this is what the system is doing. And it's doing only it on demand when it's needed. But when THC comes in, takes over all that communication. In the prefrontal cortex, where, your area of executive function and planning, decision making, impulse control, that there's a study that's been done by Alba as a scientist, and looking at measuring the thickness of the prefrontal cortex during adolescence from the ages of 14 to 19. And they looked at kids who used cannabis and kids who did not. And the kids who used cannabis, they took everybody and measured their thickness of their prefrontal cortex at the beginning of the study. And they had to make sure everybody had about the same thickness. Everybody looked the same. And then they followed them for these 5 years. And what they found out is that the kids who used cannabis, their prefrontal cortex thinned 30% more on average than kids who did not use. And that all comes from just changing that communication, because there's this beautiful time in the brain called pruning. And that pruning is meant to build the ultimate architecture of the brain, like the final architecture of the brain. And it's on a use it or lose it principle. So if there are connections in the brain that aren't being used, the brain says, okay, we don't need that anymore. Let's get rid of it. So it's basically just making sure the brain has this beautiful communication network. It's happening efficiently, all of this, and not, taking these wrong turns everywhere. But what happens is that when cannabis comes in, it causes more of that pruning, but not where it's needed. And so
Mhm.
what we're seeing now in science is that it's actually happening in places where maybe it shouldn't be happening. And so that's what's causing this thinning of the prefrontal cortex. And normally, it should thin from synaptic pruning, but not 30% more than those kids aren't using. So it's a problem, and you can't get that back.
Have you lost a loved one to overdose or fentanyl poisoning? I'd like to invite you to share their story on our new Emily's Hope Memorial website called More Than Just a Number. They were our children, siblings, cousins, husbands, wives, aunts, uncles, and friends. So much more than just a number. You can submit a memorial today on morethanjustanumber.org.
And so you're setting yourself up by smoking marijuana at these young ages. You're setting yourself up for more difficulty down the road because it's harder to gain that back.
Right. And there's also, not only in the prefrontal cortex, but also the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is where memories are stored and there, and it's like a library of memories that goes through. And there's thinning in that as well. So that's I would think that most people just on TV, they make fun of people who get stoned. They're kind of like not their memory's not so great, right?
Stupid. Yeah. Yeah. You're stupid, right? Yeah.
But it's important for these things to be known. And, when you look at the cannabis industry, a $34 billion industry, from last year, but they're targeting kids, and
Sure they are.
they target them with, wrappers that look like candy or gummies. And what is going to happen is, because those kids' brains are still developing, it's so easy for them to become addicted because their reward center is more heightened. There's more activity in the reward center of their brain, which means they're going to get more bang for their buck when they do it anyway. And there is definitely science that shows um, that it is a gateway drug.
Yes. And I'm telling you, every person I've talked to who had an opioid use disorder started with cannabis, including my daughter.
Yes.
So for people to say it's not a game, I mean, sure, some people can use marijuana and not go on to other things. That certainly happens, but it certainly is for many people. And so when you explain all this in those scientific terms, and I love hearing that, does that resonate with kids?
Kids, I always tell them, because I mean, of course, I make it a little simpler and things like that, but not too much. The one thing that kids will tell me afterwards, or I will hear from counselors there, they ask, "What did you like about it?" They said, "'Cause that she didn't dumb it down, that she didn't, that she gave it to us." And because I always tell them, I was like, "You can get this. You can understand this. I want to show you, why it is that, of course, I don't want someone to smoke marijuana, but it's like why it is you should wait until, your brain is developed if you're going to do something like that." And they appreciate, I think, being told, at least empowering in them with that knowledge, instead of just
Right.
saying, "Don't do it because, you're going to get
Right.
brain."
Well, we know just say no didn't work. We have to give the
Yes,
kids the why. Why? Why should you say no? And I think most kids starting at a young age, I've always believed, want to protect their bodies and their brains.
right.
And that's why we start so young with those conversations. But um, I think your knowledge is just fascinating. And the fact that you're, using your combined knowledge along with your personal experience to really reach people is incredible. What helps you most in your grief?
Oh, I found that, I've, during the time when my son was in, like, full-fledged addiction, I was boy, I can hardly remember a lot of that when I think back to that. Feel the
I
same?
I feel you. I feel the same. Yes, there's things I think I've blocked out. I mean, I don't think about really, I don't dwell on, I can't. It's just too painful. Yeah.
Exactly. after he died, I went back to work probably about 3 weeks afterwards. Um, and one of the reasons is that my other son was, yeah, I mean, it was not, it was a really hard situation. That's why I'm going to just say that it was a really hard situation. He wasn't really speaking to me, and just um, was with his dad, and it was really hard. So what I did is I worked, and so with that, I don't think I really allowed myself to grieve, and I don't recommend that for anybody. I highly recommend going and getting help, and I did, went to a hospice type of person to talk, about grief, but then what happened was I meditate, and I've always done that. The one thing that really, really helped me is I had a gratitude journal, and it was the one thing just trying to stay positive while my son was in active addiction, and uh 10 days after he died, I forced myself to write in it. And, I couldn't find anything that I really wanted to write about, but I did. It was a cup of coffee, just my dog, something, whatever that might be. And then it came to just moving on. And now I find, like, when I speak, the minute that photo comes up of him on the screen, I'll start crying now. As soon as I see it, I I have just a little, I'm talking, but I start to tear up like this, and it's like this little, relieving a little pressure every time I speak, and it helps. And then my other son has been just a champion for what I'm doing, and I
Oh,
love that, and that has helped me a lot. And so we, it was one of those things, and I think what happened with him is he also was in addiction at that time. Um, so now he's doing really well, and he totally believes in what I'm doing, and that has allowed me to, I think, just to breathe.
and maybe at some point you two will share the stage together and speak or go into schools together and speak. I don't know if you're there at that point yet, but what a great perspective from a young person who's been through it with his twin, with his own struggles. And
Yeah,
you, as a mom and as a brain scientist, I mean, it's just what better combination could you have? And when you talked about gratitude, I have to say that I was, having panic attacks after Emily died, and I only had a few panic attacks before in my life, randomly here and there over difficult situations. But um, I forced myself to just calm. Just what am I grateful for? Okay, I'm grateful for this house I'm in. I'm grateful I'm breathing. I'm just looking for anything, right? I just remember the moment when I realized that gratitude was I'm not going to call it an antidote for grief. That's not the
yes.
right word, but it is something that can
Well,
definitely help.
it was the one thing, and I tell just even people who aren't grieving, keep a gratitude journal, because it is one of those things that when you find what, every day you open your eyes, it's a gift, and I think
Okay.
losing Anders was the one thing that it put my whole life in perspective. It made me
Right.
unafraid to die, actually, because I think I get to be with him. It's like those kind of things that just, he's taught me so much from above.
And I certainly think a lot more about my own death than I ever have, following Emily's death. And it does. If you allow it, it puts your life in perspective. Now, it doesn't happen for everybody who has a loss like this, but if you allow it, it certainly can.
I think so.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Thank you for coming on the podcast and for sharing your family's story. And I'm so sorry for everything that you've been through. I am grateful for the knowledge you have and the work you're doing today.
Well, I'm really grateful for all you're doing too. And I hope we can continue to speak offline too, because I think you and I have a very similar story.
And thank you for listening to Grieving Out Loud. You can find more episodes anytime on our website, emily'shope.charity. We've also included links to episodes we think you may enjoy in the show notes. One of those is with a mom who blames cannabis-induced psychosis for her son's death.
And he said, Mom, I just want you to know that you were right. And I'm like, about what? I didn't know what we were talking about. And he said, about the marijuana. He said, you probably don't remember, but you told me many years ago that marijuana would hurt my brain. And it's ruined my mind and my life. And I am so sorry, Mom. I love you.
Again, check out that full episode with Laura Stack in the show notes. While you're there, we'd really appreciate it if you'd take a moment to rate and review this podcast. It helps us further our mission to raise awareness about the opioid epidemic, prevent substance use disorder, and connect families with the help they need. Thank you for listening. Until next time, wishing you faith, hope, and courage. This podcast is produced by Casey Wandenberg King and Kaylee Fitz.